Welcome Beyond the Text by 6-7.
Today we're going to a pretty specific place. Usually in these deep dives, we start with a historical event, maybe a biography, a timeline, something concrete.
Something to anchor us.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But today we're starting with attention, a real conflict that I think sits right at the heart of the modern human experience.
And it's a conflict I feel a lot of our listeners will recognize, especially if you consider yourself, secular or maybe atheist or just completely burned out on organized religion.
That's a lot of people.
It is. We're looking at a text today that won the Nobel Prize for Literature back in 1913. It's called Gitanjali by Rabindranath Tagore.
Which means song offerings.
Right, song offerings. And here's the tension, the paradox I want to throw at you right from the start. This is technically a book of devotional poetry. It's about God.
No question.
But, and this is a huge but, it's a text that spends an incredible amount of time telling you to stop praying.
It's amazing, isn't it? It explicitly tells you to leave the temple. It tells you to put down your prayer beads, to stop your chanting.
It basically says that if you're looking for the divine in a church, a mosque, a temple, any kind of ritual, you're looking in completely the wrong place.
You're missing the point entirely.
That's what hooked me. I was reading through the source material and I got to poem 11 and I literally had to stop and put the book down. I had to reread it.
I have the same reaction.
Because you expect a mystic from early 20th century Bengal to be all about the rituals, the incense, the sacred ceremonies. But he writes, and I'm paraphrasing here, "Open your eyes, you fool. God isn't in this dark corner with you."
He's a bit more poetic than "you fool." But yes, that is absolutely the sentiment. The line is, "Open thine eyes and see that God is not before thee."
So here's the thing. Whether you're a devout believer, a complete skeptic, or a hard-nosed atheist who thinks all of this is just wishful thinking, Gitanjali builds this very strange and beautiful bridge.
Oh, so.
It suggests that God, or you could call it the infinite truth, whatever label you want to slap on it, is actually found in the dirt.
In the sweat.
In the sweat, in the silence of your own broken heart. It's making this incredible argument that the spiritual life isn't about escaping reality. It's about diving headfirst into the complete mess of it all.
And that, right there, is the mission of this deep dive.
Yeah.
We're not just going to read some pretty poetry. We're trying to dissect why this specific slim volume of prose poems caused what was called a new renaissance in the West 100 years ago.
And more importantly, we're asking if this century-old text can provide a framework for spirituality that actually fits the modern, exhausted, skeptical mind.
Because let's be honest, exhausted is the default setting for most of us right now, isn't it?
It's my baseline, absolutely.
It is. And Gitanjali is in so many ways an antidote to that exhaustion, but not in the way you might think. It doesn't tell you to go take a nap.
No.
It tells you to wake up.
Okay, so before we get into the really heavy philosophy, and we're going to get deep into the weeds of atheism versus belief here, we have to set the stage. Because the way this book even arrived in the West is, it's almost a movie scene.
It really is. The introduction in our source material, the one that set the world on fire, was written by W.B. Yeats.
The W.B. Yeats, a giant of Irish literature, a founder of modernism, a man who was, let's be honest, deeply cynical about the modern world.
He was not easily impressed.
Not at all. And the image the source gives us, it's one that just sticks with you. Yeats is carrying this manuscript. These are loose translations that Tagore had scribbled out himself in English while on a ship. And he's carrying them around London on omnibuses, on trains.
Just try to picture that for a second. London, around 1912. It's the absolute peak of the industrial age. It's loud, it's filthy, it's obsessed with commerce and empire.
Everyone is rushing. Everyone has somewhere to be.
And there sits Yeats, this towering figure of literature, huddled in the corner of a train car, reading these quiet, simple, profound lines from Bengal.
And he says, this is a direct quote, that he had to keep closing the manuscript lest some stranger would see how much it moved me.
He was on the verge of tears on his daily commute.
So the question is why? Why did it hit him that hard?
That reaction is the key to everything. It wasn't just because the poems were beautiful, though they are. It was because he was seeing a contrast that absolutely broke his heart.
A contrast between what he was reading and what the world outside the train window.
Exactly. Yeats talks about how, after reading the manuscript, he consulted a distinguished Bengali doctor living in London to understand Tagore better. He was trying to figure out, who is this guy? Is he a pop star? Is he a saint? What's his deal?
And the doctor's answer is what really opens this all up.
It's fascinating. The doctor basically explains that in Bengal at that time, there wasn't this rigid separation between culture and religion and daily life that we have in the West.
The silos.
The silos, yes. This is what we're calling the Renaissance of the heart. The doctor tells Yeats that Tagore's songs aren't just for intellectuals, they're sung by everyone. The boatman rowing down the river sings them. The beggar in the street sings them. The philosopher in his study reads them.
Whereas in the West, and Yeats was painfully aware of this, we compartmentalize everything. We have our work self, and then our family self, our political self, and then maybe, for 1 hour on a Sunday, our spiritual self.
And those cells almost never talk to each other. If you're a poet in London, you're writing for other poets. You're part of a scene. You're definitely not writing for the guy driving the bus.
No way.
But the doctor describes a civilization where the soul, for lack of a better word, is the common soil that everyone grows from. It's shared. And Yeats was just obsessed with this idea. He starts critiquing his own culture. And honestly, reading it now, it sounds like he's describing Twitter or cable news.
Oh, absolutely. That one line is incredible. He says, 4/5 of our energy is spent in the quarrel with bad taste, whether in our own minds or in the minds of others.
The quarrel with bad taste. Just think about how much of our daily mental energy is burned up just by being annoyed.
Annoyed at a political headline, annoyed at a bad movie, annoyed at some random person's opinion online.
Yeats calls this a state of constant warfare. We're always reacting.
Yeah.
We're always pushing against something. And then he picks up Tagore, and he finds a mind that isn't fighting. It's a mind that is content, as he says, to simply discover the soul.
I want to push back on that a little bit, though, because it sounds incredibly idyllic, right? This idea that everyone in Bengal was just sitting around singing poems and floating on rivers, it sounds a bit like a fantasy.
A bit romanticized, for sure.
Yeah, and the source material itself points to the discipline behind it. The doctor tells this anecdote about Tagore sitting, quote, immovable in contemplation for 2 hours every morning.
Or the story about his father floating on a barge down a river for 8 hours, just in a state of reverie.
It sounds lovely until you actually try to do it.
I was just going to say.
If I tried to sit immovable for 2 hours, I would last maybe 4 minutes before I started thinking about my email, my to-do list, what I'm having for lunch.
And that, right there, is exactly why this text is both so difficult and so necessary for us. The pace of Gitanjali is a direct confrontation to our way of life. It demands that you decelerate.
You can't speed read it.
You absolutely cannot. If you skim these poems, they sound like greeting card cliches.
Yeah.
You know, flowers, God loves soul. It's meaningless. You have to read them at the speed Tagore lived. You have to slow down enough to let the words actually cut.
And they do cut. You said that this isn't just soft, fluffy spirituality.
Not at all. As we move into the text itself, you'll see that Tagore is actually deconstructing the very idea of religion as most of us know it.
So let's jump straight into that, because this is the section that I think builds that bridge between the believer and the atheist. We keep mentioning poem 11. Let's really get into it.
Leave this chanting and singing and telling of beads.
I mean, let's just pause on that first line. He is talking directly to a devotee. He's talking to someone who thinks they're doing everything right by the religious rulebook.
Absolutely. This person has gone to the temple. They've shut the doors to block out the noisy, distracting world. They are in a dark, quiet corner trying to focus on the light.
Which is the classic definition of piety. Sanctuary, sacred space.
And Tagore just shatters it. He says, "Whom dost thou worship in this lonely, dark corner of a temple with doors all shut? Open thine eyes and see thy God is not before thee."
Okay, so if God isn't in the temple, where is he?
He is out there. He is there where the tiller is tilling the hard ground and where the pathmaker is breaking stones.
He's with them in sun and in shower.
And his garment is covered with dust.
That line, his garment is covered with dust. That's the one that really got me. Because traditionally in almost every major religion, Christianity, Hinduism, Islam, the divine is associated with purity.
With light, with whiteness, spotless robes.
Cleanliness is next to godliness.
Right. And Tagore is saying, no, God is dirty, God is sweaty, God is out there with a pickaxe breaking rocks.
That's a radical theological shift. It completely challenges the clockmaker God who sets the universe in motion and then just watches from a distance, or the king on the throne model.
It does. Tagore is proposing a God of what theologians would call immanence. The idea that the creative force of the universe isn't separate from creation. It's deeply, messily, inextricably involved in the act of creation itself.
And creation is messy. It involves friction and breaking things to make new things.
Exactly.
But let me play devil's advocate for a minute. Isn't there a risk here that this is just romanticizing poverty.
Right.
It's easy for a Nobel Prize-winning poet to write about how holy and noble it is to break stones for a living.
It's a fair question.
For the guy actually breaking the stones, it's just back-breaking labor. It's not spiritual, it's survival. He'd probably rather be doing something else.
And that is a very valid critique, one that, Marxist critics have leveled at Tagore in the past. But I think if you look deeper at the text, he isn't saying that the suffering itself is good. He's saying the separation is the illusion.
What do you mean by separation?
The priest in the temple thinks he is superior to the laborer. He thinks he is closer to God because he's clean and spiritual and engaged in higher thoughts.
Yeah.
Tagore is leveling that entire hierarchy. He's saying to the priest, you're wrong. You are closer to truth because you're hiding from the world. The man who is physically engaging with the raw material of the earth is actually closer to the source of life than you are.
So it's a critique of spiritual elitism.
Profoundly so. And it's also a critique of what he calls deliverance. That's a key word for him.
Right, deliverance, which in the Christian sense, that's salvation, being delivered from sin and death.
In the Eastern sense, it's moksha, or nirvana, escaping the cycle of rebirth, the wheel of suffering.
The end goal of most religions is to get out, to escape this veil of tears, to ascend to heaven, to merge with the absolute, whatever it is. The goal is to leave.
And Tagore just slams the door on that idea.
He does. He writes, deliverance. Where is this deliverance to be found? Our master himself has joyfully taken upon him the bonds of creation. He is bound with us all forever. Joyfully taken upon him the bonds of creation.
Think about what that means, especially for an atheist or a secular humanist. If you just strip away the word master for a second, what is he saying? He's saying the purpose of life is not to transcend life. The purpose of life is to be alive.
To be bound to it.
To be bound to it, to be connected to the physics, the biology, the struggle, the mud, the dust, to not seek an escape hatch.
It reminds me of that whole modern obsession with, like, sire, financial independence, retire early.
Yes.
The whole goal is to stop working, to get to the beach, to exit the system as fast as you can.
The escape hatch mentality. We treat our actual lives as a kind of waiting room for something better. We're waiting for retirement. We're waiting for the vacation. We're waiting for heaven. Tagore suggests that this entire mindset is a form of atheism in itself because it denies the inherent value and sacredness of the here and now.
He argues that the meaning is found in the engagement.
Exactly. Come out of thy meditations and leave aside thy flowers and incense. What harm is there if thy clothes become tattered and stained?
It's an invitation to get your hands dirty.
It's an invitation to stop protecting your own purity, whether that's your moral purity, your intellectual superiority, or just your clean shirt, and to join what he calls the great fair of common human life.
Okay, so if we accept that, if we agree, I'm not going to look for God in a chant, I'm going to look for meaning in my work and my struggle, what happens then? How does that change the relationship? Because Gitanjali isn't a labor manual. It's incredibly intimate. It reads like a love story.
And that's the second major pillar, and this is where it gets psychologically very, very interesting. In the Western tradition, and again, these are broad strokes, there's often a massive gap between the human and the divine. God is the judge, you are the defendant.
Or God is the king and you are the peasant. You grovel, you confess, you beg for mercy.
It's a relationship based on power and distance. Tagore completely changes the dynamic. He uses metaphors of a friend, a lover, a playmate. But the one that really sets the tone for the entire book is the metaphor of the flute. This is right there in poem 1.
This little flute of a reed thou hast carried over hills and dales, and hast breathed through it melodies eternally new.
Think about that object, a flute. Specifically, a simple reed flute. What is its most important characteristic?
It's hollow?
It's empty, it's frail, it has holes in it. By itself, it's just a dried up stick. It has no intrinsic value. But because it is empty, it can be filled with breath.
This frail vessel thou emptiest again and again, and fillest it ever with fresh life.
This connects directly to the concept of ego death that you hear about in modern psychology or in studies of meditation and psychedelics. The idea that the self, the I, with a capital I, is actually an obstruction.
We spend our lives trying to be full.
Yes, full of knowledge, full of opinions, full of our own importance. We build this solid identity.
We curate our social media profiles. We build our personal brands. We want to be seen as solid, substantial.
And Tagore says, no, the goal is to be hollow. If you are full of yourself, there is no room for the music of life to move through you. The melody only happens when you are empty.
But isn't that passive? Oh, just be a flute. Let the universe play you.
It sounds a little bit like surrendering your own agency, your free will.
Ah, but that's the paradox. It's not passive, it's receptive. And there is a world of difference between the two. Being passive means you're just a lump on the couch. Being receptive means you are alert, you are open, you are sensitive, and you are ready to respond.
And this leads to all those waiting poems.
It does. There are so many of them. The speaker is always sitting at a window, watching the road, waiting for a traveler to arrive.
And this introduces that romantic tension. He describes the soul as a woman waiting for her lover, or a servant waiting for her king. But the king in Gitanjali is a very tricky character.
Very. He doesn't come when you expect him. He doesn't show up with a brass band and parade. He comes in the dark temple of midnight. He comes when a storm is howling. He comes when you're not ready.
There's that fascinating interplay of shame and pride in Poem 41. The speaker says, "I sit like a beggar maid, drawing my skirt over my face." She feels ashamed of her poverty, of her unworthiness. But at the same time, she feels this secret electric thrill that the King of all Kings is coming specifically for her.
It captures that psychological state of feeling completely unworthy, yet somehow chosen. It's like the imposter syndrome of the soul.
It's a great way to put it. Why would the infinite possibly care about little old me? But the text insists that the infinite needs you, just as the musician needs the flute. It's a reciprocal relationship.
And that idea of reciprocity, the idea that we have to give something back, that brings us to what I think is the single most powerful story in the entire collection. Poem 50, The Beggar's Mistake.
Oh, this one is a masterpiece. If you only remember one thing from this entire deep dive, let it be this story.
Okay, so set the scene for us.
The speaker is a beggar. He's going from door to door, begging on the village path. It's a bad day. His bag is almost empty. And suddenly, in the distance, he sees a golden chariot gleaming in the sun.
And his first thought is, naturally, payday.
Exactly. He thinks, my evil days are at an end. He imagines the king will step down and just start scattering handfuls of gold and jewels into the dust. The beggar is getting ready to scramble for it. His whole posture is about to be one of taking.
But that's not what happens. The chariot stops right in front of him. The king gets down, he smiles, and then he does the absolute last thing the beggar expects.
He holds out his own hand to the beggar and asks, "What hast thou to give to me?"
I mean, can you just imagine the shock, the sheer audacity? You're the king of the universe, you're riding in a chariot made of gold, and you are asking the guy in rags for a handout.
It feels cruel. It feels like a test or a mockery.
The beggar calls it a kingly jest. He's confused, he's probably angry, defensive. So, very grudgingly, he reaches into his little cloth bag, and he rummages around and he finds the least little grain of corn.
The smallest, most insignificant, pathetic thing he possesses. And he gives just that one grain to the king.
It's like, here, take this, leave me alone.
Basically, the king takes the grain, gets back in his golden chariot, and drives away. No shower of gold. No miracle, just that one strange, baffling transaction.
And the beggar goes home, probably fuming, feeling cheated.
He goes home, and at the end of the day, he empties his bag onto the floor to count his meager earnings. And there, in the little heap of poor rice and corn, he sees something glittering.
A tiny grain of gold.
One single grain of gold, the exact size of the grain of corn that he gave to the king.
And that's the moment the floor just drops out from under him.
I bitterly wept and wished that I had had the heart to give thee my all.
Man, that line just hits you right in the gut.
It completely flips the economic theory of spirituality.
Yeah.
We usually think of prayer or religion as a one-way transaction. I give obedience, I get safety, or I'm a good person, so the universe owes me good things.
It's the vending machine god. I put in a coin of prayer, I push B7, and I get a Diet Coke of blessing.
Right. And Tagore says, no, the universe is a mirror. It reflects back to you exactly what you put in. If you engage with life tentatively, if you hold back, if you hoard your emotions and your energy, if you protect your ego at all costs, you get a tiny return. You get the least little grain of gold.
But if he had just dumped the whole bag...
The implication is that the whole bag would have been transformed into gold.
Yeah.
But here's the crucial point, especially for the atheist listener. The beggar didn't actually need the gold. He needed to break the habit of hoarding. The miracle wasn't the gold he found later. The miracle was the act of giving the corn. It was about breaking out of the scarcity mindset.
That feels incredibly modern. We live in a constant state of perceived scarcity. Not enough time, not enough money, not enough likes on social media. We clutch our little bags of corn so tightly.
We do. We are terrified that if we let go, if we give freely, we'll be left with nothing. Tagore argues the exact opposite. It is only by letting go, by emptying ourselves, that we can ever be filled. It goes right back to the flute. You have to be empty to sing. You have to give to receive.
But giving everything, that's a genuinely scary thought, and Gitanjali doesn't shy away from that fear, because while we have all these sweet lover metaphors, we also have a section that is, well, it's genuinely threatening. We have the sword.
Yes, and this is what prevents the text from becoming, you know, toxic positivity.
Hmm.
Tagore knows that truth is dangerous. It's not always comforting.
In poem 52, the speaker is asking for a token of love. Again, they're probably expecting a flower or a ring, something gentle.
And instead, the king gives him a sword. A mighty sword flashing as a flame, heavy as a bolt of thunder.
And the speaker's reaction is fear. He says, I'm ashamed to wear it, frail as I am, and it hurts me when I press it to my bosom.
It hurts me. Why would a divine gift hurt? Because the sword is the sword of truth. And what is the primary function of a sword?
It cuts. It severs.
Exactly. What is it severing? It's severing the bonds of illusion. It's cutting away all the useless things we cling to. He says, from now I leave off all petty decorations. No more dolls' decorations for me.
Dolls' decorations. What a brilliantly dismissive phrase for all the things we think are so important. Our social status, our job titles, our reputation, our vanity.
Tagore is saying that if you really want to wake up, if you want to be able to hold the sword of truth, you have to be willing to cut all that crap away. And yes, that process hurts. It leaves you feeling naked. It leaves you without your decorations.
But the result is freedom. There shall be no fear left for me in the world.
Because once you have nothing left to lose, you have nothing left to fear.
This whole theme of freedom, and more often, the lack of it, brings us to poem 31, The Prisoner. And honestly, reading this one felt like a personal diagnosis of my entire career.
I think it's a diagnosis of the modern condition. It's structured as a dialogue. The poet asks the prisoner, prisoner, tell me, who was it that bound you?
And at first, the prisoner blames the master, or God. He says, I thought I could outdo everybody in the world in wealth and power. I heaped up my treasure, and on waking up, I found I was a prisoner in my own treasure house.
This is the success trap. We work 80 hours a week to build this treasure house. To get the mortgage, the promotion, the fancy car, we think we're mastering our environment. But eventually, the maintenance of the fortress becomes the entire job. The things we thought we owned start owning us.
But then the poet pushes him. He asks, prisoner, tell me, who was it that wrought this unbreakable chain? And the prisoner's answer changes completely.
It was I, said the prisoner. It was I who forged this chain very carefully.
Very carefully. That's the part that's so haunting. We don't just accidentally stumble into becoming slaves to our careers or our habits or our ambitions. We do it with precision, with craftsmanship.
We forge every single link. I thought my invincible power would hold the world captive, and when the ceremony was over, I found that it held me in its grip.
So if you want to talk about God versus atheism here, Tagore is saying the barrier between you and the infinite isn't some angry deity who's punishing you.
No. The barrier is you. You are the jailer, and you are the prisoner.
So that deliverance we talked about earlier, the escape, it isn't about leaving the world, it's about breaking the chain of your own ego.
Precisely. There's another poem, number 29, that says it perfectly. I am ever busy building this wall all around, and as this wall goes up into the sky day by day, I lose sight of my true being in its dark shadow.
The higher the wall we build for our own protection, the bigger the shadow it casts on us.
And we are all living in that shadow, which I think moves us perfectly into the political side of the text. Because if we're all busy building these prisons for ourselves individually, we are absolutely doing it collectively as a society.
We have to talk about poem 35, where the mind is without fear. I know this is practically an anthem in India, it's sung in schools, but we need to look at it through the lens of right now.
It's his most famous work, without a doubt. And while it was clearly written as a prayer for India's independence from the British Empire, it's really a prayer for what you could call the country of the soul.
Let's look at the specific barriers he wants to break down. He dreams of a world where the world has not been broken up into fragments by narrow domestic walls.
Narrow domestic walls. In 1913, that meant caste, religion, colonial borders.
Yeah.
But today, just think about your social media feed. Think about the algorithm. We've deliberately broken the world up into tiny, warring fragments.
Left wing versus right wing, boomer versus Gen Z, believer versus atheist.
We live in echo chambers. Those are our narrow domestic walls. And Tagore argues that these walls physically prevent us from accessing truth. You cannot see the infinite if all you're doing is staring at a wall you built.
But here's the part that's so interesting for the skeptic, for the atheist. He doesn't pray for more faith. He prays for more reason.
Yes, that's so important. The line is, where the clear stream of reason has not lost its way into the dreary desert sand of dead habit.
What a brilliant image. Dead habit is the desert, and reason is the clear, cool stream that's supposed to cut through it.
Usually in religious texts, you see faith positioned against reason. Tagore does the opposite. He positions reason against blind habit. He sees the intellect clear, critical, questioning thought as a divine force. He wants a mind that is fluid, that is moving, that cuts through the stagnant sand of this is just how we've always done it.
So for him, being truly spiritual isn't about turning your brain off and just believing.
No, it's about turning your brain on as brightly as you possibly can. It's about being led forward into ever-widening thought and action. Notice that word, widening. A fundamentalist always wants to narrow your thought. Read this one book, follow these exact rules, hate those people. Tagore wants your thought to widen, to expand. He sees the divine in expansion, not contraction.
He calls it a heaven of freedom.
And notice the grammar. He prays, into that heaven of freedom, my Father, let my country awake. Heaven isn't a destination you go to after you die. It's a state of consciousness you wake up to, right here, right now. You could be in that heaven in the middle of a traffic jam, if you could just break down the walls of fear and dead habit in your own mind.
That brings us, I think, to the final frontier of the book. We've talked about work, love, ego, politics, but the entire last section of Gitanjali is obsessed with the one thing we all spend our lives trying to ignore: death.
And this is where the text might be the most comforting, especially for an atheist, because his perspective on death is incredibly light. It's almost festive.
Yeah, he never paints it as the Grim Reaper with a scythe. He constantly paints it as a wedding.
Right. In our culture, death is the thief. It's the ultimate loss. It takes everything away from you. It's the end of the story. Tagore views death as the last fulfillment of life.
In poem 91, he says, "The flowers have been woven and the garland is ready for the bridegroom. After the wedding, the bride shall leave her home and meet her lord alone in the solitude of night."
He's reframing the fear completely. If you have spent your entire life trying to connect with the infinite, through your work in the dust, through your songs, through your love for others, then death is simply the moment the veil finally drops and that connection becomes total and complete.
But let's be real for a second. That is beautiful poetry. But when you're actually facing it, when you're in a hospital room or you're losing a parent, it does not feel like a wedding. It feels like a brutal tragedy.
Of course. And Tagore knew tragedy intimately. He lost his wife. He lost several of his children. He wasn't writing this from some detached ivory tower. But look at the analogy he uses in Poem 95. He compares it to a nursing baby.
The child cries out when from the right breast the mother takes it away, and the very next moment to find in the left one its consolation.
It's just a transition. The baby cries because it experiences a moment of loss. It thinks it's being starved. It doesn't have the perspective to realize it's just being moved from one source of nourishment to another. Tagore is suggesting a radical trust in the process of the universe. He says, because I love this life, I know I shall love death as well.
That line is the whole key. You can't love one and fear the other. They are two sides of the same coin. They are the same package.
Exactly. For him, life and death are just the two breasts of the same mother.
And this leads to what I think is maybe the most powerful secular prayer in the entire book. Poem 96. This is the one that I think anyone, regardless of their theology, could use as a kind of mantra for a good life.
When I go from, hence, let this be my parting word, that what I have seen is unsurpassable.
Let's just stop there for a second. Imagine having the perspective, the gratitude to be able to say that on your deathbed.
What I have seen is unsurpassable. No regrets. No, I wish I had made more money. No, I wish I had been more famous. Just the sheer spectacle of existence was enough. It was more than enough.
He goes on, in this playhouse of infinite forms I have had my play, and here have I caught sight of him that is formless.
In this playhouse of infinite forms I have held my play. That is the ultimate affirmation of life. He doesn't say life was a test. He doesn't say life was a burden or a trial. He says it was a play. It was a game. It was a visual splendor.
And even if you don't believe in the formless director behind the scenes, just having the gratitude to say that you got to be in the playhouse for a while, that's an incredibly powerful perspective on mortality.
It shifts the entire focus from what do I get after I die to, my God, look at what I received while I was alive. He says, my whole body and my limbs have thrilled with his touch. It creates a sanctity of the senses themselves.
Which brings us completely full circle. We started with the idea that God isn't in the closed-off temple.
And we end with the idea that God, or meaning, or beauty, or truth, was in the playhouse all along, in the sights and sounds and feelings of being alive.
So, if we try to synthesize all of this, we've gone on this journey from the dusty road with the pathmaker, to the intimate waiting room of the lover, to the cutting edge of the sword of truth, and finally to this wedding bed of death.
It's a complete psychological and spiritual arc. And what holds it all together is this stubborn refusal to separate the spiritual from the actual.
That is the big takeaway for me. Tagore isn't asking you to believe in a specific dogma or a creed. He's just asking you to open the doors.
Exactly. Poem 73. No, I will never shut the doors of my senses. The delights of sight and hearing and touch will bear thy delight.
He's not an ascetic. He's not telling you to fast in a cave and deny your body.
He's telling you to feast on the world. And he suggests that the flavor of the world is the flavor of the divine. So if you're an atheist, you can interpret this as the universe is experiencing itself through your senses. Do not shut them down. Do not build a wall of ego. Do not clutch your tiny grain of corn. Just open the door.
And that brings us right back to that question of the beggar and the king. The question that I think haunts this entire collection.
What hast thou to give to me?
We spend our entire lives asking the universe, what can you give me? Give me a promotion, give me a partner, give me security, give me happiness.
And the universe, or the king, or reality, whatever you want to call it, just stands there with an open palm and says, no, you go first. You have to pour something out to make room for the new.
It's a terrifying thought, isn't it? Because what if we give and we get nothing back? What if we're just left with an empty bag?
That is the risk. That is the gamble of faith. Not faith in a creed, but faith in the process of life itself. If you give your corn, maybe you get gold. Maybe you just get an empty bag. But at least you aren't spending your entire life holding on to a single rotting piece of corn forever.
So here's the thought I want to leave everyone with today. We talked about the prisoner who forges his own chain very carefully. We talked about the beggar who clutches his single grain of corn. Tagore is suggesting again and again that the only thing keeping you from the infinite, whether you call that God or just a sense of boundless peace, is your own desperate, fearful need to be the master of your own small fortress.
So if the king appeared at your door tonight, not in a golden chariot, but maybe just as a quiet moment of opportunity, a chance to be vulnerable, a chance to forgive someone, a chance to be truly generous with your time or your attention, would you give him your whole bag? Or would you, like the beggar, just grudgingly give him a single grain of corn?
I think most of us are still counting the corn. I know I am.
We all are. But the invitation to finally let go, it's always there.
And that's the work. Thanks for diving deep.
Thank you.